My brother stole thousands from my company, and our parents blamed me. However, my accountant uncovered his dark secret. My brother, the prodigal son, always basked in the glow of our parents' affection. Matthew could do no wrong, at least in their eyes. Even when he wrecked Dad's car at 16, they bought him a new one, patting his shoulder and saying, "Boys will be boys." On the other hand, I spent my childhood in the shadow of his golden halo, striving for scraps of praise that never quite felt enough. The car incident was a defining moment in our family history. I was 14, and Matthew had just turned 16. Our dad owned a vintage 1968 Mustang, cherry red, which he had spent years restoring. It was his pride and joy, a symbol of his youth and hard work. Every Sunday he'd spend hours in the garage polishing it until it gleamed, often calling Matthew to help him despite my obvious interest. One Saturday night, Matthew convinced Dad to let him take the Mustang out for a spin. He had just gotten his driver's license and was itching to show off his new freedom to his friends. I remember the unease in Dad's eyes as he handed over the keys, a mixture of pride and apprehension. "Take care of her," son Dad said, patting Matthew on the back. "Be back by 10." Matthew flashed his trademark grin, the one that always melted their hearts. "Thanks, Dad. You're a legend." That night, I sat in my room, trying to concentrate on my homework, but my mind kept drifting to the Mustang. I could imagine Matthew cruising around town, windows down, music blaring, basking in the envy of his friends. I felt a pang of jealousy, wishing I could be out there with him, feeling the wind in my hair. Time ticked by, and as the clock approached midnight, I grew increasingly anxious. I heard the phone ring. I crept to the top of the stairs, listening to the muffled conversation. Moments later, I heard my parents rushing out the door. Something was wrong. I followed them to the garage and saw the Mustang's empty spot, a gaping void that seemed to swallow the light. They drove off in a hurry, leaving me standing there, heart pounding with fear and curiosity. Hours later, they returned with Matthew. His face was pale and his hands trembled. The Mustang, however, was nowhere to be seen. I later learned that Matthew had wrapped it around a tree while racing his friends on a back road. He walked away with just a few scratches, but the car was totaled. Dad was livid, his face a mask of controlled rage. "What were you thinking?" he roared. "Do you have any idea what that car meant to me?" Matthew's eyes were wide with fear and guilt. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to. It just got out of control." Mum stepped in, her voice soothing. "He's safe. That's what matters. We can replace the car." I stood in the shadows, watching the scene unfold, a mixture of anger and sorrow brewing inside me. If it had been me, I would have been grounded for life. But Matthew, they hugged him, assured him it was just a mistake, and promised they'd get him a new car. The next day, they took him to the dealership and bought him a second-hand sports car, a sleek black model with all the latest features. Matthew was back to his old self in no time, basking in the glory of his new ride, while I was left to deal with the fallout of their blatant favoritism. When I finally turned 16 and asked my parents for a car, they told me they were still paying off the debt of Matthew's car and wouldn't be able to afford one for me until I was 18. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a knot of resentment tighten in my chest. It was as if my accomplishments, my efforts, were invisible. I vowed then that I would prove myself, not for their approval, but for my own sense of worth. Years later, that resentment had morphed into a determination that drove me to succeed. I was the first in our family to graduate college with a degree in business and a head full of dreams. I started a small tech firm that grew faster than I could have imagined. When it became too much for me to handle alone, I hired Matthew. He was struggling, and our parents begged me to help him. Reluctantly, I agreed, and that decision has haunted me ever since. Matthew had always been charming, with an easy smile that disarmed people's suspicions. He made friends effortlessly, while I labored to build genuine connections. It was his charm that I believe swayed our parents' unwavering favor, but it was also that charm that allowed him to quietly siphon funds from my company over the span of 3 years. I only discovered the theft by accident during an audit. The discovery happened during an otherwise routine audit. I remember the exact moment, a cold Wednesday afternoon, when my accountant, Linda, came to my office, her face pale and her hands trembling as she held a stack of documents. "Alex, you need to see this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took the documents, my eyes scanning the figures and transactions that didn't make sense. My heart pounded harder with each page I turned, a sickening realization dawning on me. Matthew had been creating fake invoices and funneling money into a personal account. "We went through the records thrice," Linda continued, her voice steadier now. "It's definitely him." I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. My own brother? I had to be sure. I had to see it for myself. "Let's go through everything again," I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. We spent hours poring over the records. Every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every deceitful act was laid bare. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, the devastation becoming clearer with each passing moment. I felt a mixture of rage, sorrow, and a deep, gut-wrenching betrayal. Finally, there was no denying it. Matthew had stolen from me, from the company, and from the people who trusted us. The proof was irrefutable. The confrontation with Matthew in my office was inevitable. My heart pounded with a mix of rage and sorrow. How could you do this to me? To your own brother? He had the gall to smirk. "Oh, come on, Alex. Don't be so dramatic. It's just money. You can make more." His nonchalance was the final straw. All the years of playing second fiddle, the moments of unacknowledged effort and love, they coalesced into a burning desire for retribution. I wanted him to feel the depth of my pain, to understand the gravity of his betrayal. "Get out," I said through gritted teeth. "You're fired." He shrugged as if he'd expected nothing less and left without another word. The damage, however, was done. The financial strain on my company was severe, but the emotional toll was even worse. Trust was broken, not just in my brother but in my own judgment. I knew our parents would side with him. They always did, so I decided to gather undeniable proof before confronting them. I spent sleepless nights combing through financial records, compiling evidence. When I finally had enough, I invited my parents over for dinner. They arrived, their faces etched with concern. "Alex, what's going on? Why this sudden meeting?" Mum asked, her eyes darting nervously. "Sit down." "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I laid out the evidence. Their faces shifted from confusion to disbelief and finally to anger, but not at Matthew. No, their anger was directed at me. "Why are you doing this?" Alex's dad demanded. "Trying to ruin your brother's life." "Ruin his life," I echoed, incredulous. "He stole from me. He betrayed our trust." Mum's eyes filled with tears. "He's your brother. Family is supposed to forgive and support each other." It was like being a child again, watching them coddle Matthew while I stood in the corner, invisible. But this time I wasn't a helpless child. I was a man who had been wronged, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the narrative. "Support? You mean enable? You're still making excuses for him, still treating him like he's the golden child who can do no wrong. He needs to take responsibility for his actions, not have me bail him out." Enough. Dad's voice was a thunderclap. "This conversation is over." They left in a huff, leaving me alone with my anger and frustration. I knew I couldn't count on them to hold Matthew accountable, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next few months were a blur of lawyers and court dates. I sued Matthew for embezzlement, determined to get justice even if it tore our family apart. The case became a media spectacle, our dirty laundry aired for all to see. Matthew, of course, played the victim, painting me as the vindictive brother out for revenge. Our parents supported him publicly, their faces grim in every courtroom appearance. But behind closed doors, I knew they were suffering. The strain of the trial, the media attention, and the loss of their golden child's reputation were taking a toll. Matthew, of course, played the victim, painting me as the vindictive brother out for revenge. Our parents supported him publicly, their faces grim in every courtroom appearance. But behind closed doors, I knew they were suffering. The strain of the trial, the media attention, and the loss of their golden child's reputation were taking a toll. The trial was grueling. Matthew's defense was built on character witnesses, friends, and former colleagues who spoke of his charm and generosity. but I had the hard evidence: bank statements, falsified documents, and expert testimonies. The truth was undeniable, and eventually the jury saw through his facade. Matthew was convicted. The sentence was light probation and restitution, but the damage to his reputation was irreversible. He'd never work in the industry again. As the verdict was read, a sense of vindication washed over me. It was a bittersweet victory. I had lost a brother, but I had gained a sense of justice. The rift in our family might never heal, but at least I had stood up for myself and for what was right. I felt a hollow sense of victory. Justice was served, but it came at a steep price. Our family was shattered. My parents refused to speak to me, blaming me for Matthew's downfall. The holidays were a stark reminder of our fractured bonds, the empty seat at the table a ghost of what once was. I tried to move on, to focus on rebuilding my company and my life, but the shadow of betrayal lingered, a constant reminder of the cost of justice. I sought solace in friends and colleagues, the people who stood by me through the storm. Months turned into years, and life settled into a new normal. I still saw my parents occasionally, but the conversations were strained, the wounds too deep to fully heal. Matthew moved to another state, trying to start over, but the stain of his actions followed him. Then one night, I received a call that would change everything. It was Mum, her voice trembling. "Alex, it's Matthew. He's in the hospital." My heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "An overdose," she said, her voice breaking. "Please come. We need you." Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the hurt, he was still my brother. I rushed to the hospital, finding my parents in the waiting room, their faces etched with worry and guilt. Matthew lay in a sterile room, tubes and machines keeping him alive. Seeing him like that, so vulnerable and broken, stirred something in me. Anger and betrayal faded, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. We sat in silence, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air. Days turned into weeks. Matthew survived, but the recovery was slow and painful. I visited him daily, our conversations tentative at first. We spoke of mundane things: the weather, the news, carefully avoiding the minefield of our past. One evening, as I sat by his bedside, Matthew finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Alex. For everything." His words hung in the air, a fragile offering of peace. I looked at him, seeing the remorse in his eyes, and felt my anger dissipate. "I know," I said quietly, "but it's not just me you need to apologize to." Our parents stood at the doorway, listening. Matthew's eyes filled with tears as he looked at them. "Mum, Dad, I'm sorry. I've been a terrible son and brother." Mum rushed to his side, her tears mingling with his. Dad stood back, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, he stepped forward, placing a hand on Matthew's shoulder. "We all made mistakes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's try to move forward together." It seemed like a breakthrough, a chance to heal the wounds that had torn us apart. But as the days went by, the old patterns began to re-emerge. Our parents visited Matthew daily, showering him with affection and support. I, on the other hand, received cold shoulders and disapproving glances. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the tension finally boiled over. Mum turned to me, her face stern. "Alex, we need to talk about Matthew's rehab." "What about it?" I asked, sensing where this was heading. "It's expensive," Dad interjected, his tone accusatory. "And we think you should help pay for it." I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to pay for his rehab after everything he's done?" "He's your brother," Mum insisted. "He needs our support." "If you don't help, you're just ruining his life," Dad added. "Ruining his life," I echoed, my voice rising. "Matthew ruined his own life. He's the one who stole, who lied, who overdosed. And now you expect me to clean up his mess." "It's the least you can do," Dad snapped. "After all, family supports each other." I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "Your coddling of Matthew has broken him, and now you want me to pick up the pieces. The only way Matthew will heal is if you let him take care of himself." "You're being selfish," Mum said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is about saving your brother's life." "No, this is about you refusing to see the truth," I replied, my voice cold. "Matthew needs help, but he needs to earn it, to face the consequences of his actions." I won't be a part of this enabling any longer." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Our parents looked at me with a mixture of anger and disappointment, their faces reflecting the same blind loyalty that had always defined their relationship with Matthew. I stood up, my decision clear. "I love you both, but I can't be a part of this. Matthew needs to stand on his own, and so do I." As I walked out of the house, I felt a sense of liberation. The chains of my past, the constant need for approval and validation, had finally been broken. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time I felt truly free. In the end, our family remained fractured, the same old wounds never fully healing. Matthew continued his struggle, our parents by his side, unable to see the damage their favoritism had caused. And I moved forward, determined to build a life defined not by their approval, but by my own strength and resilience.